You're on.
So, of course, it's ridiculous for me as a 28-year-old person to tell you all about my illustrious career. What I can do, however, is share with you as a fairly recent Amherst grad who's done work both with nonprofit organizations domestically and abroad, academic research internationally, and also some journalism internationally. Some of my experiences and some of kind of the lessons from that may hopefully be applicable to you and your position here. Background on myself, I came from a liberal New York family, progressive community. I knew sort of from the time I was very young that anything kind of for-profit wasn't going to be my shtick. And so I had a lot of nonprofit influences. I kind of knew that's where I was going to go, but I wasn't sure exactly what that would mean. So in the international context, actually the first really formative experience I had at Amherst was studying abroad. And I know we have a sort of a mix of ages here. And I went to Cuba. I did a semester in Havana, which was challenging. The food was terrible. I lost 25 pounds. And I'm skinny, right? I was skinny to begin with. And yet at the same time was a really mind-opening experience, right? This was the first time I'd really lived abroad, experienced what it was to sort of challenge my cultural assumptions and think about politics, not just a political science classroom in Amherst College, but, this is a really different political system. So I had that experience. It was a very powerful one. I knew that I wanted to continue having some type of international exposure after I graduated. In the meantime, the way that I kind of kept working towards, perhaps unintentionally, these things that I believed in was I took advantage of the summers. And so I think they're now called, I don't even know what they're called. Then they were called Fellowships for Action. And something that the Center for Community, it's now housed in the Center for Community Engagement. I took advantage of the opportunity that Amherst College gave to fund public service internships over the summer. I started very close to home. I worked in an organization that provided services to mentally ill homeless people in my neighborhood. That was one summer with some funding from Amherst College, which is great. The next year, I sort of built on that first experience and got another internship, this time perhaps more competitive, at an organization that provided affordable housing in New York City. And these were both sort of really important experiences in terms of understanding how do nonprofits work, is this something I really want to do, where might I want to engage in these issues. And then, fast forwarding in the theme of 5-minute presentations, I was going to graduate, I was a senior, and I knew I wanted to go abroad, and I knew I wanted to do something with these experiences that I'd had. And what I ended up doing was applying for, and ultimately being successful in my application for a Watson Fellowship. And the Watson Fellowship is a great opportunity that if you don't know about, lets you go abroad to as many countries as you like and pursue an independent project of your design. My application was something that combined my interest in Latin America, and the experiences I'd had doing with these issues of homelessness and housing. So I was working on issues of homelessness and housing in my project in Chile and South Africa. And so that took me abroad for a year. The one rule of the Watson Fellowship is, in addition to not needing to produce anything, you're not allowed back in the country for a year, which is a tricky thing. But it forces you to really engage with the place where you are and deal with the challenges of no institutional affiliations, really pursuing this project and this passion. So for me, one thing that I would say, in addition to study abroad, take advantage of the fellowships while you're here for internships during the summer, and also think about these opportunities for postgraduate fellowships as a springboard potentially to doing international work. I then came back to New York and did work with a housing nonprofit in New York City, still kind of working on the same theme of housing and homelessness. And did that and had a really good experience. And yet at the same time thought, well, it might be a good idea to go back to school. And I ended up doing another fellowship or scholarship, and I got a scholarship that enabled me to go to Oxford in the UK. And I've now been based in Oxford for the past 4.5 years, where I was first a master's student in international development and now a doctoral student in politics. And again, I think, these fellowships and scholarships, in this case it was the Rhodes Scholarship, they give you these opportunities to broaden your horizons, to explore living elsewhere, whether it's in academia or other things. In this case, I've lived in the UK for 3 years, which is an international experience, but also my research is based in Central America. So here, academic research, and I think Sharukh can really speak to this, academia really enabled me to engage in a hands-on way with very particular development initiatives and think critically about how these things work, what doesn't work, and whether you want an academic career or not, the real value in it, I think, is that doing some type of graduate study really enables you to explore particular models and to understand kind of critical frameworks to assess certain things, so that you're not, and not to speak of sort of historical and political context in places you might be working. I think I'm running out of time. What I will,
I'll let you know.
so my research is based in rural Honduras and Guatemala. I focus on parental participation in schools in very remote areas. That seems pretty abstract, but if you think about dynamics of parental participation, it has lots of applications everywhere. So I spent a year doing my field work in both Honduras and Guatemala. And perhaps another lesson along the way, and I think this sort of really came out in Chris's talk, is sort of be open to things coming to you. It turned out that my field work in Honduras was scheduled for right after the coup in Honduras. Not intentionally, obviously. And so I ended up in, let's say, September of 2009 in Honduras, having done a lot of study on this country, and knowing that there weren't very many people who could really speak to a U.S. and international audience about what was going on the ground. And I was there. So I began not sort of just throwing my doctoral research aside, but in addition to my doctoral research, doing freelance journalism on sort of the aftermath of the coup and other issues in Central American politics. And I'd never done anything related to journalism before. But in the ensuing months, I wrote dozens of pieces for different media outlets that were focused on what was going on in Honduras. Then when I moved to Guatemala, what was going on in Guatemala. And have subsequently brought that back and am now writing about U.S. politics as well. So maybe the last thought is, in addition to being open, at least for me, one lesson has been knowing that there can be a continuing and ongoing conversation between what you do in the U.S. and what you do elsewhere. I'm sure you've found this. And so, the issues that I study in Central America, I now think about in the U.S. context. And, I write about immigration, which has implications for Latin America. It also has implications here. So those are just some thoughts.